Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Mark Edward Lundy? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, consider supporting me on Patreon, and check out my podcast on YouTube, Bella Grande Media. I will put the relevant links for those items in the description for this video. So first I'll look at the background in this case. It's quite brief. I'll move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. In the year 2000, 43-year-old Mark Lundy and 38-year-old Christine Lundy were a married couple who lived in Palmerston North, New Zealand. They had a 7-year-old daughter named Amber. Mark Lundy had his own business selling kitchen sinks and countertops. He would frequently travel by motor vehicle around New Zealand. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On August 29, 2000, Mark Lundy drove to Wellington, New Zealand as part of his business. At 5 p.m., he checked into a motel in the town of Petone. This was about 93 miles away from his residence in Palmerston North. Either Christine Lundy or Amber Lundy called Mark on his cell phone when he was in that town. The call ended at 5:43 p.m. At 8:28 p.m., Mark placed a call from his phone to a business partner. At this time, Mark was in Petone. At 11:30 p.m., while in that same town, he called an escort service. A sex worker was in his hotel with him from 11:50 p.m. on August 29 to 12:50 a.m. on August 30. As far as Christine and Amber, a receipt for McDonald's was found in the family's home for a purchase made at 5:45 p.m. on August 29. Christine Lundy received a call from a friend just before 7 p.m. Later, an unreliable witness would claim to have seen Mark at his house at 7:12 p.m. wearing a blonde wig. Christine's computer, located in the family home, was turned off at 10:52 p.m. On the morning of the next day, August 30, Christine's brother stopped by the Lundy family home to talk to Christine about a business situation. He entered through a sliding door and found the bodies of Christine and Amber Lundy. Christine was on the bed in her bedroom, and Amber was on the floor near the doorway. They had been murdered with something like a small axe or tomahawk. The murder weapon was never found. A jewelry box was missing. It was never found either. Christine's blood was found on the back window, which had sustained damage from something like a crowbar. So it appears as though whoever killed Christine and Amber entered through that window. The police immediately suspected Mark Lundy. He was stopped in his vehicle at about 1:15 p.m. on the outskirts of Palmerston North as he was driving back toward his house. He had heard what happened, so he was driving back. There was a bag on his back seat containing a polo shirt. Mark admitted that this was the shirt he had worn the previous evening. The shirt had two visible stains, one on the left breast pocket and the other on the left sleeve. The stain on the sleeve contained what the authorities referred to as a lump of substance. They believed it was brain tissue. Mark was arrested 6 months later. The Crown, which is the prosecution in New Zealand, said Mark killed his wife to collect on her life insurance policy and murdered his daughter because she entered the bedroom during the homicide. Mark did not want to leave any witnesses. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison, eligible for parole in 17 years. In 2002, Mark Lundy appealed his conviction. He lost dramatically. Instead of being eligible for release in 17 years, he now had to wait a minimum of 20 years. I guess if he appealed a few more times, he could have been in prison for life. In 2012, he appealed again. His case was based on 3 issues: the brain tissue on the shirt, the time of the homicides, and the time that Christine's computer was shut down. The court determined that Mark's convictions were unsafe. They were overturned. He was released from prison as he waited for his second trial. At his second trial, the Crown changed its strategy. Now it was saying that Mark Lundy committed the murders in the early morning hours of August 30 instead of during the evening on August 29. On April 1, 2015, Mark Lundy was found guilty. In 2017, he filed another appeal. He was unsuccessful. He appealed to the Supreme Court of New Zealand. The appeal was denied, in December of 2019. Now moving to my analysis. Was Mark Lundy actually guilty? Let's look at the factors both for and against the idea that he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory evidence. Mark and Christine Lundy increased their life insurance coverage 4 days before the murders. It was increased from $200,000 to $500,000. It's worth noting that the increase had not yet gone into effect at the time of the murders. The couple was having significant financial difficulties around the time of the homicides. Bankruptcy was a real possibility. Even though there was no murder weapon found, Mark had a variety of tools in his garage. He used paint to mark those tools. Matching paint was found in Christine's hair. Many people believe that Mark's emotions during the funeral for his wife and daughter were highly exaggerated. He was overreacting. Many considered his behavior obnoxious and transparent. Brain tissue was found on Mark's polo shirt. Amber Lundy's blood was on the shirt as well. A prisoner who was incarcerated with Mark Lundy claimed that Mark Lundy confessed. This is considered inculpatory, but I consider it worthless. Prison informants are the least reliable witnesses anywhere on the planet. The informant was described by his probation officer as a manipulative offender. He had over 20 convictions, which involved dishonesty. Furthermore, the informant said that Mark discussed information about his appeal, which was not available to Mark Lundy at that time. So I guess from the informant's perspective, Mark was not only guilty, he was able to travel through time, making him a particularly dangerous offender. Now moving to the exculpatory evidence. As far as the life insurance, the increase in the benefit was not Mark's idea. It was the broker's idea. The broker actually recommended going up to a $1 million benefit. Mark declined that coverage. So why would he talk himself out of money? If the plan was to make money, one would think he'd want to make as much as he could. If he thought that going up to $1 million was too suspicious, then he would have known that going up to $500,000 would have been suspicious as well. Mark was aware that the increased insurance benefit had not yet taken effect at the time of the murders, so he knew he wasn't going to enjoy the benefit of that increase. No one ever saw Mark Lundy with an axe or a tomahawk. His neighbors said he used to borrow theirs. As far as that paint that was found that matched the type that he used on his tools, other paint was found on the bodies that was never matched to anything. Moving to the brain tissue and the blood found on Mark's shirt, this was really the smoking gun for the Crown. A test showed that it was central nervous system tissue. The problem here is the test was new and unproven. The technology was created just for this case. Even if it was central nervous system tissue, which is disputed, technicians could not determine the origin of the tissue. It was not necessarily human. It could have been from meat Christine had been handling before the murder. Also, the tissue could have been there as a result of contamination by the police. They could have accidentally transferred it from the crime scene to the polo shirt. As far as the blood from Amber, it could have been blood flakes or dust, rather than from direct blood stains. So that could have happened any time under non-homicidal circumstances. Christine had 10 hairs in her right hand and 11 in her left. It appears as though she fought her attacker. The hairs did not belong to Mark Lundy. DNA from unknown men was recovered from under the fingernails of Christine and Amber. The DNA did not match Mark Lundy. Also under their fingernails were more than 50 clothing fibers. The fibers did not match Mark Lundy's clothing. Unknown fingerprints, a palm print, and footprints were discovered at the crime scene. They did not match Mark Lundy. Under the theory of the crime that Mark Lundy killed his wife on the evening of August 29, the timeline based on the phone calls that Mark made and received simply would not work. The police unsuccessfully tried to recreate the journey between the two cities, the one that Mark would have had to make. He would have had to drive home, commit the murder, and then drive back. Private investigators and journalists tried as well, several times. Nobody was even close to completing the trip in the allotted time. There are a few other reasons that the first timeline doesn't make sense. If Mark committed the murder on August 29, who turned off Christine's computer after the homicides? Again, it was turned off at 10:52 p.m. Christine's body was found naked in her bed, which is how she usually slept. The TV was off, the lights were off, her glasses were beside her on a cabinet. Amber's body was found in the doorway of her parents' bedroom. She was dressed in a nightgown. Her bed appeared to have been slept in. Mark could have committed the murders in the early morning hours of August 30, which was the Crown's theory for the second trial, but there were problems with this theory as well. No one saw him driving into or out of Palmerston North. No one saw his vehicle at his house. No one saw him driving out or back into Petone. In addition, there was one witness who claimed to have seen Mark Lundy running back to his car at 7:12 p.m. on August 29, as I mentioned. She said he was wearing a blonde, curly wig. This helped the prosecution in the first trial, but under the second theory, how does this make sense? Mark was there at 7:12 p.m., yet drove back to the hotel in Petone, then drove back again in the early morning hours of August 30 to commit the murder. This really makes it seem as though the prosecution was making things up and using a witness they knew was unreliable. Mark visited clients on August 30. They said that there was nothing unusual about him. He was normal and cheerful. They said he didn't look like someone who just killed his family, although I have to wonder how many times they've actually encountered individuals who just killed their family. Did they really have a lot of comparisons to work with here? Like, were they going to say, oh yeah, I interacted with 5 or 6 people that day. At least 3 had just killed their families. They were much different than Mark Lundy. Mark told the police to check what time Christine's computer had been shut down. Why would he do this if he had just killed her in the early morning hours? If Mark planned on killing his wife either on August 29 or August 30, why would he hire a sex worker? He would have known that this would really make him look guilty. He did nothing to hide that transaction. The police claim they found a bracelet on the seat of Mark's car. They suggested it came from the missing jewelry box. Friends and family members said the bracelet was too small for Christine. Also, it did not contain DNA from anybody in the family. With all this in mind, do I think that Mark Lundy was guilty? Even though the Crown's case was terrible and mishandled, I do think that Mark Lundy was guilty, but there's no way that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. There's reasonable doubt all over this case. I think Mark Lundy was convicted because he hired a sex worker and he was overly dramatic at the funeral. This really seemed to irritate people. The central nervous system tissue argument is a way that people could feel okay with convicting him, but the experts disagreed on that topic. There was plenty of doubt regarding the material that created the stain on the shirt. The part I find so interesting about this case is the acrobatics of the Crown. They changed their story and offered inconsistent theories so many times, I don't know how they kept it straight. During his first trial, they explained to the jury how Mark Lundy must have committed the crimes on August 29, not in the early morning hours of August 30. They had all these reasons why it could only have happened on August 29. Then in the second trial, they changed their story to August 30. Now they were positive it happened on August 30. All the evidence they presented before about that August 29 theory was to be disregarded. That was just a mistake. They're just going to push that off to the side and say, no, now we have a new theory. I also find it funny how they defended the prison informant. The Crown had convicted him 20 times, no doubt saying things like he's a terrible person, he's dishonest, you should never trust a word this guy says. But then in Mark's second trial, they made it seem as though the prison informant was an angel. He only speaks the truth. Everybody should absolutely trust everything he's saying. I think this is a case where the Crown simply needed a conviction, and they were going to get it one way or the other. Justice was not involved in this case at all. Those are my thoughts on the case of Mark Lundy. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.